So what we talked about last time, we talked about the imaging system, how we identify the imaging system, and we identified it by energy level, right? You remember talking about that? Energy level, mammo was going to be identified. We have a lower KVP, maximum KVP in mammography. And what we do in diagnostic, energy type, it could be diagnostic where we're taking plain film radiography, or it could be fluoroscopy, or it could be a combination of both. And it will be an RF room, radiology and fluoroscopy room, where you can do pretty much everything, and that's what you refer to as a general purpose room. So we talked about all that. We kind of skipped around a little bit, but we're going to go back and we're going to pick up some things. So regardless of what type you have, you've got to have some place to put the patient, right? So even if they have dedicated chest x-ray rooms. So even if you have a dedicated chest x-ray room, you have to have a place to put the patient. And most of your rooms, though, are not dedicated chest rooms. They're general diagnostic or just RF or general diagnostic rooms. So we have to have something to put the patient on. You'll see that referred to as a couch. I think Bushong refers to it as a couch. Most people talk about it in the context of being a table. So if you see the word couch, that's what they're referring to as a table. So the characteristics of the table, thinking about different types of material and how x-rays behave, and remembering that there's no such thing as radioparency, right? We have two different things. We have radiopacity, meaning that it's something, a material that completely blocks x-rays, or radiolucency, which is selective transmission, selective absorption. We have those two types of things. So anything that you put in front of the x-ray tube in the middle of the x-ray beam is likely to absorb something, right? Including the couch or the x-ray table. So we're going to have some absorption there. It's going to be very minimal. And we want to use something that is very radiolucent, but it's still radiolucent. So it's going to absorb something. So we have to have two characteristics. One is it has to be radiolucent, as radiolucent as possible. Most of the time it's going to be carbon fiber. I've seen plastic ones, and you can tell the difference. Carbon fiber feels very, very hard. Some older plastic ones have a little bit more give to them, but they also have to be uniform thickness. All right. So if you have something that's radiolucent, like you're radiolucent, what can you tell me about the difference between somebody who's asthenic and somebody who's great big hypersthenic?
Different body thickness.
What's that?
Different body thickness.
Different body thickness, and what happens to the x-ray beam as it goes through a thicker thing? You get more absorption, exactly. So if you have a tabletop that's not uniform thickness, let's say it's shaped more like that, then naturally what you're going to have is more absorption down here than up here, right? Which is going to give you an artifact on every image you shoot. So it has to be uniform thickness, but it also has to be radiolucent. So both of those things apply. So making this more uniform thickness, what you've also got are a couple of different orientations for your table. Okay, so you've got relative uniform thickness there, but the carbon fiber and especially the plastic is not going to be sturdy enough, and it needs some sort of support. Right? We talked about the floating tabletop. So we have to have something holding that up into the apparatus so that we can move the tabletop. Floating tabletop, motor driven tabletop. So what you're going to have is metal support. And a lot of times that metal support is on the bottom of the table. And that's good. That's good. The only problem that you have here is that under the table, what do you have? Bucky. Yeah, you got a Bucky with an image receptor inside of it, right? And we're looking at this as if we're standing at the foot or the head of the table and looking down the length of the table. Okay? So we've got this support going down the length of the table. You may have some at the head and the foot as well, but if we have a Bucky, the Bucky has to be beneath that in order to be able to pull it out and push it in, right? So inside of that, we have the image receptor. The Bucky is pulled out we push the image receptor in, we'll put the patient here, and we got a pretty round patient there, then what do I have once I push this thing in and my image receptor is, some reason it's gotten fatter, but is there? What do I have naturally that could be an imaging problem here? OID, increased OID, right. So you have, with the supports on the bottom, you have a natural increase in OID, okay? So regardless of what you're shooting, even hands, extremity work, thinnest anatomy possible, you're looking for bones in the extremity work, right? So you naturally have an increased OID regardless of what you're doing. This just makes it worse. So magnification, increased OID always gives you magnification. We can demonstrate that pretty easily. You may have to turn the lights out because my battery. Not that one. Now orientation back. Can you hit the bottom button back there on each one of those? Okay, good. Now, we've got, that for me. We've got no OID here. You probably can't see my shadow because it's right behind my hand. Shadow's no bigger than my hand, right? But if I pull my hand back here, let's swap hands. What can you say about the size of my hand versus the size of that shadow? Yeah, my hand's a whole lot smaller than shadow, right? So anytime you have an increase in OID, you gain magnification. If I move it out far enough, what does the shadow look like aside from being big?
Fuzzy.
Right. So anytime you have an increase in OID, you're going to have an increase in magnification, loss of sharpness, or reported detail. Okay. So that's a problem. Is it a big problem? Probably not too big of a problem, but it's still a problem. If you really want to see sharpness, you really want to see the detail, you're going to lose some there. So how could we eliminate some of that? Well, glad you asked. What we can do is take the tabletop, instead of putting the braces at the top, on top of the, instead of putting the tabletop on top of the braces, what we can do is put the braces on top and suspend the tabletop from it, like that. Now our OID, we can pull our patient down closer, and did we reduce our OID? And the answer is yeah. This patient is now asymmetric. We reduced our OID, which increased our sharpness of recorded detail. Okay, so your tabletops can either be flat, that's great from an imaging standpoint, or they can be, this is what they refer to as a curved tabletop, and the curved tabletop could come off of the top of this and then dip down like that, and then come back up. Either way, that's what we refer to as a curved tabletop. The problem with a curved tabletop is this. Let's say this patient, instead of being an abdomen or a chest supine, let's say this patient has a pleural effusion. Now you're going to have to dip back into earlier in the semester. How do we identify pleural effusion? Decubitus, exactly. So we're going to do a decubitus. Let's say the x-ray tube is over here. And we'll put the patient right here, and their air fluid level is right there. Okay, so we have a word for how the x-ray beam comes off of the anode. And the meaning of the word is with equal intensity in all directions. All right, so the word is isotropic. It's isotropic emissions, comes off equal intensity in all different directions, which means that we create x-rays in here and they're going all over the place, right? I think I use the analogy, it's like dropping a bowling ball in a mud puddle. Where is the mud going to go?
Everywhere.
It's going to go everywhere, right? It's going to go everywhere. That's exactly what happens whenever we create x-rays. and get that from you, so you don't have to rock it like a baby next to it. Thanks. Can you hit the top three buttons now? Thank you. Orientation's off this morning. I also have control over here. Okay. So what that means is we create an X-ray beam at a pinpoint source, right? It's very small. It's measured in millimeters. Where all of the X-rays that we're going to use come off is measured in millimeters, which means that the X-rays are going to come off and they're going to spread out. And where is my air fluid level going to show itself to be? If I put my image receptor right here, and this is a metal support for the table, what am I going to see? Air fluid levels? No. You're going to see a big chunk of metal. Right? So the problem with our curved tabletop is that we have to contend with this stuff. So how can you get that out of the way? Build the patient up, exactly. So you're going to take some towels, sheets, one of those big square things, lay the patient on it to overcome that, right? So because of the divergence of the central ray, you will project small pleural effusion into the support system, so you have to build the patient up so that that doesn't happen, right? So both of them have benefits, both of them have drawbacks. You've reduced your OID, so you've increased your sharpness of recorded detail for anything that you shoot into the bucky. But if you're doing D cubes, you got a little bit of a problem, right? You can overcome it, but it is a little bit of a problem. So most of the time, again, they're going to be carbon fiber. You may have some other material as well, but they definitely have to be radiolucent. Can't be a metal tabletop. And they have to be uniform thickness. So we talked about the operating console and what we control at the operating console. And we're going to spend pretty much the rest of the day talking about the X-ray circuit. So everything in the X-ray circuit that you control directly, with the exception of one thing, is going to be, it's going to operate off a lower voltage, okay? You don't want to be pushing buttons that have power to them of 150,000 volts, right? So they're going to be lower voltage. So in our X-ray circuit, what's the first thing that the electricity gets to after it leaves the transformer outside? It enters the hospital, enters the imaging system. What's the first thing it gets to? Autotransformer. The autotransformer, sort of, but there is one thing before the autotransformer. It's a surge protector type thing that we talked about, and that is called the there's a line voltage compensation circuit. All right. So line voltage compensation circuit fixes our voltage before it goes into the autotransformer, because our voltage can fluctuate in a hospital. The book says by as much as 5%, could be more than that. 5% change in kVp is enough to see some sort of noticeable difference on the image. At least when we use screens and films, it did. In digital, not so much, but it's still not accurate, right? So if you make your exposure at the exact same time that the heater kicks on in the hospital, you're not going to get the kilovoltage you expected. Okay, so we have to fix it. It's not just a surge protector. It's more like a constant. What do they call those things? They use them for computers. If there's an outage, your computer doesn't die right away. Like a backup battery source, right? It is something that not just acts as a surge protector, but if power dips, it gives you the right amount of power. Okay, so that's line voltage compensation. Okay, so line voltage compensator compensates for fluctuations in incoming line voltage. If you have a power surge, and it keeps it steady. If you have a power dip because air conditioner kicks on, it still keeps it steady. All right. Now it goes directly into the autotransformer. So autotransformer, all the words we used for it before, that would be the variable resistor, right? Variable resistor, what other words do we use?
Rheostat.
Rheostat. It is, again, the autotransformer. And it is also our KVP control. So our turns on the primary side are set. So when we adjust our KVP, what we're actually doing is we're adjusting the contacts on the secondary side. We squeeze them together and we get a lower voltage. We spread them apart, we get a higher voltage. So it works off of the incoming line voltage and alternating current to create a changing magnetic field. So that if we tap in somewhere in a, coils less on the secondary side than on the primary side, then our voltage goes down, right? So if we feed it 220 volts, 240 volts, whatever, let's just make it easy and say 200 volts. And I incorporate 1/4 of the turns on the secondary side is what I had on the primary side, then what is my voltage change for the secondary side versus the primary side? It's a direct relationship. I use 1/4 of what I had over here.
It goes up by 4.
It goes down. Our voltage is going to go down, right? So if I use 1/4 of them and I started with 200, what's 1/4 of 200? 50, right? So I feed it 200 volts. Now I've got 50 volts over here. And this lower KVP than you're ever going to use, but let's just use it for this particular example. Let's say we're doing a pediatric finger. Don't need a whole lot to penetrate a 3-year-old's finger, right? So in that way, by spreading those out and bringing them together, I control my KVP. But do I have KVP yet? Where does KVP come from? It's right there in the name, high voltage transformer, right? This is a transformer, but it's autotransformer. It's KVP selectors just adjusting voltage in anticipation of becoming KVP. It's not KVP yet. Okay. So we've got the line voltage compensation. We've got the autotransformer. Autotransformer, if you look on page 99, it talks about the different that you've got major and minor KVP adjustment. You don't see that anymore. The only time you're ever going to see that is if you're ever working with a single phase machine. And with a single phase machine, what you'll have is 2 different dials. So you can identify a single phase. If you're working with a single phase machine, it's gonna, instead of having buttons to adjust KVP, MA, and time, it's gonna have knobs. Those knobs go clack, clack, clack every time you move them. Okay. And on a single phase control panel, you will see major and minor KVP adjustment. All right. You're not going to see that in a hospital. Those are obsolete except for possibly in a doctor's office, vet clinic, something like that. Where output doesn't need to be quite as high, and they're working off a budget basically. X-ray room down the hall. When they put that one in, we got into kind of a consortium that lowered the price, group pricing on it, and we got it for about $200,000. So most of your doctor's offices are going to be, on a stricter budget than what your hospital is going to be on. So minor and major KVP adjustments, you just don't see them. You push the button and it makes those adjustments, but they're inside working on your auto transformer. Okay. So you've got the auto transformer. Now, I want you to flip over to page, bless you. What I wanted. saw a diagram earlier. Look at page 111. That's the entire X-ray circuit. This test is the one that has 72 questions, and about a dozen of those come from a picture like this. It's not this picture, but it's like this. If you know this picture and what all these components are, then you shouldn't have a problem with the diagram on the test. Okay, so like for example, what's the one thing that comes before the autotransformer?
Transformer.
The comes before the autotransformer.
Oh.
Line voltage compensation. So on that diagram, the only thing that comes before the autotransformer is the line voltage compensation circuit, right? All right, so if you notice on this diagram on page 111, you see where it says kVp meter. You got a kVp meter right about here. Again, is it measuring kVp? The answer is no. No. What's a distinguishing characteristic of the autotransformer? As we just tested on this, y'all. You're starting to act like the sophomore students. They zip their mouth as soon as they come through the door. One coil. That's it. It only has one coil, right? And what do we do with the autotransformer? We increase or decrease voltage, right? So where is kilovoltage created? Already mentioned that. It's right in the name. High voltage transformer, right? So this is where the kVp is created. So if this is our kVp meter, is it truly reading kVp? Answer is no. So what we're going to refer to that is the pre-reading kVp meter. And by the way, I'm not, saying anything to y'all that I didn't say to the sophomores yesterday. I told them yesterday that y'all talk all the time, and I can't get them to say a word. I love them to death, but they just don't answer. It'll go quicker if we just all sing. And it doesn't work. But I've had classes that were so quiet that I pulled the chair up and just stared at them while they stared at me. Yes, we can both play this. We can both do this. All right. So it's a pre-reading kVp meter. Why is it a pre-reading kVp meter? Yeah, I don't have kVp yet. But what's a characteristic of this as opposed to this one?
More turns.
It's fixed. It's more turns, but it's fixed. The turns ratio is fixed. So whatever we have here, we know exactly what we're going to have over there. So is it a problem that we're reading this and calling it kVp? The answer is no. No, because if this is showing us to be what it's supposed to be, we know what it should be over there. It's never going to change, right? The amount of increase is never going to change. So it's pre-reading kVp. Also, though, what we're going to have over here is remembering that we've got kVp and mass has two components, that's MA and time. We have to have a timer circuit as well. All right, so a timer circuit is over here as well. All right, so our voltage comes out of the autotransformer and it goes into the step-up transformer. We have a kVp meter over here on the low voltage side. We have a timer over here on the low voltage side as well. So that takes care of our kVp, right? We have an adjustment as voltage, but we have an adjustment, set our voltage, becomes kilovoltage over here. So we've taken care of our kVp. But we also have to have a way to control our MA, right? We have a way to measure our time. We'll get there here in a minute. But we also have to have a way to adjust our MA, right? So I'm going to refer you back over to page 111. And this is how I'm going to draw the circuit out on the test. Okay, so you've got the control console, then you get the high voltage section, and you have the X-ray tube. And in the chapter, Bushong is going to refer to the control console portion of the circuit as being low voltage. Okay, which it is lower voltage than the opposite side, the high voltage section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to split the circuit right here on the test. Okay, this is going to be the low voltage, and this is going to be the high voltage portion of the circuit. I'm going to split it right down the middle. Okay, so everything on this side is going to be low voltage, everything on that side is going to be high voltage. Everything that we can control, we're going to control from here or somewhere else, because it's low voltage. You know, you go pushing on those buttons and it's powered with 100,000 volts. It's going to hurt, right? So we're going to control everything we can over here. But we also have to have a way to control our MA, right? Time we're going to get to in a minute. We have to control our MA. So we're going to have a separate circuit. And again, if you look back at the diagram on 111, you see that Bushong includes half of this circuit, the filament circuit, in the high voltage section. I'm going to call it its own separate circuit, just so as to not confuse it. Okay, because this is low voltage at 200, in our example here, 200 volts. This is high voltage in tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 volts. This is going to be very low voltage at 25 volts. So I'm going to call it the filament circuit. Okay, because no part of this is going to be high voltage until it gets to the filament itself. So we have two things down here. We have another rheostat, and it's always going to be drawn kind of like, I don't know, a bush in the wintertime when all the leaves fell off. It's just sticks sticking up. And what we're going to control here is our MA. Okay, so we got our MA. It's basically a rheostat as well. We can increase or decrease the MA, and it usually goes something like 100 MA, 200, maybe 300, 400, and 600. Your machine may have slightly different ones. Okay, so it's just MA. MA is milliamperage. Amperage is just a measurement of electrons. That's all it is. So you saw the X-ray tube, right? How far was the cathode end of the X-ray tube? And I'll define exactly what all is in the cathode end of the X-ray tube later. How far was it from the anode? Not very far. Not very far at all, right? So if I have 200 volts and I have a cloud of electrons around a filament, you know, and they're spreading out from the filament, and my anode is right there, and this is negatively charged because all the electrons, and this is positively charged because of the lack of electrons. Everything that we've talked about in electrification, what would be the tendency of these electrons? Just crowd up more on the filament?
Hit the anode.
Hit the anode. They'd want to jump across, and we don't want that to happen until we're ready for that to happen, right? So now we've got our amperage set, and we're going to send our, everything through this was high voltage transformer. We also refer to it as a step up transformer, right? So in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to take more turns on the primary side and less turns on the secondary side of the, that's the step up transformer. We have more turns on the secondary side than the primary side. This is step down transformer. We have more turns on the primary side than the secondary side, right? So this is a step down, that's step sideways, step down transformer. So what we're going to do here is we're going to drop our voltage from that 200 volts down to something more like 25 volts. Okay, so what are volts? What do we say that our voltage does? The electron was the car and the voltage was the motor. It's the motor. It's what pushes it along, right? So the likelihood of 200 volts pushing those electrons across the tube could happen. The likelihood of 25 volts, probably not, right? Right? Here you've got, a lot of power. And here in our, analogy here, this is your, I don't know, Mustang, Corvette, whatever. Especially, after it goes through this. Down here, what you've got is a bicycle, right? It's just not going to push them across. So it comes out of that and it goes into our filament. The purpose for this circuit down here is to do two things. The primary purpose is to provide electrons to our filament to create our space charge. Extended that a little far to create our space charge. So we hit our prep button and what happens? We get x-rays right across the tube, right? No, we don't. You get to prep, right? You just hit the prep button, and what you're doing is this circuit is not energized all the way across yet. It may be energized up to this point, but it's just not energized all the way across yet. This circuit down here is energized, though. So what we do is we run a low voltage current through our filament to create a space charge, a whole lot of electrons. We heat it up, create a whole lot of electrons, space charge, thermionic emissions, hot ions. We don't get our exposure until we energize the second half of this other circuit. Okay. So what do we control from our control panel? Well, there's line voltage compensation. You're not going to see that unless it's on a single phase machine. Okay. You control your KVP by adjusting the contacts on the
Low voltage.
It's
side.
in a low voltage circuit, but which side of the autotransformer? This is primary, this is secondary, right? So you adjust the contacts on the side of the autotransformer. What you're actually doing there is adjusting your voltage. When you spread them out or bring them together, you're adjusting your voltage. We're going to determine how much voltage we're going to get on the secondary side of the step up high voltage transformer by using the reading KVP meter, right? All right, so when you press your prep button, you get the rotation of the anode. We'll get there. We've touched on it, but we'll get there. But we energize all this down here, right? We'll make our adjustments to our KVP. We don't have KVP yet. We're just energizing this to get us to the point of thermionic emissions. We create a space charge in preparation of making x-rays. You're not making any x-rays yet. Everybody with me so far? Okay, so a couple of things then. If you look on page 99, you'll see a correction circuit has to be incorporated to counteract the space charge effect. And that is, as the KVP is raised, the anode becomes more attractive to the electron stream that would not have enough energy to leave the filament. These electrons join the electron stream, which effectively increases the MA with KVP. Okay. So what that's saying is that you're going to create a space charge, right? You go get all these electrons, and as the KVP goes up, you want to maintain, if you set a certain MA and therefore a certain MAS, you want the correct number of electrons to jump across the X-ray tube. But the thing is, you're going to have so many electrons stored right here that, especially at that higher KVP, the electrons that might not have enough juice to go across the tube, if you hit it with a high enough KVP, they will. Which means that not only do you get, your KVP, but you get more mass than what you needed, more mass than what you wanted. Does that make sense? Okay, and that circuit is there just to prevent that from happening, so that when you make your exposure, you get the proper amount of mass. Without that circuit, you may set, let's just throw numbers out there. You may set 10 mass at 50 kVp and you get 10 mass. You set the same mass at 100 kVp and you may get 12, 15 mass. Does that kind of make sense?
Mhm.
So you don't want that, right? You want your mass to be accurate. That's what that circuit is intended to do. So a couple of other things that we just need to touch on. You're probably not going to see it, or at least one other thing, and that is falling load generator on page 100. Falling load generator, if you ever work in places where they need really rapid exposures, what they refer to as serial exposures, like in special procedures, cardiac catheterization, they have a special MA circuit, and what it does is that whenever they start an exposure, it starts with naturally the highest possible MA station. Okay, so it starts with the highest MA station, and as the exposure progresses, that MA station naturally drops. The reason for that is because what they need is the lowest time possible. Okay, so the reason I say cardiac catheterization is because what are they looking for in cardiac cath lab? Looking for vessels in the heart. Okay, what type of motion do you have? You have two types of motion: voluntary and involuntary. Right, so you tell the patient, stop your heart. What's going to happen? The heart is not going to stop. Right, you can tell them to hold their breath, but you can't tell them to stop their heart. So falling load generators are used to kind of mitigate some of that, give you the highest possible MA to give you the lowest possible time. The problem is your machine can't maintain that MA throughout the entire exposure, so it falls. Your MA drops throughout the exposure. Okay, so long exposures, it's going to drop further and further. And that's falling load generator. One other thing that I want to point out to you, and I'm not seeing it just offhand, but there is such thing as what we refer to as saturation current. Okay, so current is mass, right? Amperage. So saturation current involves such a high current, that a high exposure, that your machine can't give you any more than what it's already giving you. Okay, it's saturated. So let's say you've got an exposure that you're going to make. I'll tell you a story real quick. I was working in surgery at the time, and we had this hypersthenic patient that we were doing a back fusion on him, and he was, if he was an inch wide, he was this wide. I mean, he was a wide man. And your portables are limited exposure, limited kVp, limited mass. And so we couldn't generate enough mass to get through this guy. Okay, so saturation current is kind of that. It's, you can't get enough to get enough exposure. You can't get enough MA. You can't get enough current to get an exposure. So what saturation current then becomes is, let's say you set a maximum exposure. Your filament is only so big. Did you get a look at the filament whenever the tube came around? It's tiny, right? Little bitty tiny wire. So when we create a space charge, it's going to be limited, how many electrons you can actually stack on that thing. Now, once you hit it with a kVp and those electrons jump across the tube, then where are those electrons? Are they still hanging around the filament? The answer is no, they're not. They've evacuated. So can you put more electrons then at the filament level? The answer is yeah. But you can get to a exposure that's so high that you can't replenish those electrons fast enough to get that exposure and keep the exposure up. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, that's saturation current. Saturation current basically means tube limit in every possible way. Even if you increase your KVP to shoot those things across faster, you're not gonna get any more current. It's saturated. You know, if you're a Star Trek fan, as a maintenance guy, is it Scotty? Give it a roll, she's got it, Captain. That's your saturation current. Can't get any more. Okay? Saturation current. I didn't see it in there, but I'm pretty sure.
That's at the bottom of 118.
I'm sorry?
That's at the bottom of 118.
118. Thank you. Wow, that's we're in the next section. Wow. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, everybody okay with all that?